Detective Sarah Chen stared at the manila folder on her desk, its edges worn and yellowed with age. The label, simple and stark, read, Case number 684721, Jenkins Martha, unsolved, 57 years. That was how long this case had been collecting dust in the Louisville Metro Police Department's cold case archives. Sarah had been with the department for 15 years, the last 3 dedicated exclusively to chasing ghosts. She'd seen her fair share of forgotten tragedies, but something about this one had gotten under her skin the moment she pulled it from storage 3 months ago. Martha Jenkins had been only 23 years old when she disappeared on a frigid February night in 1968. A nursing student at the University of Louisville, she was a beloved daughter, engaged to be married that coming June. She'd left her shift at Louisville General Hospital at 11 p.m., walked to the bus stop on 4th Street, and vanished into the winter darkness. Her body was found 6 weeks later in a shallow grave near the Ohio River, in what was then an industrial wasteland on the city's west side. The autopsy revealed she'd been strangled. There were no witnesses, no suspects, and no leads that went anywhere. The case went cold within months, buried under the weight of time and a department overwhelmed with the social upheaval of the late 60s. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. The homicide division was empty except for her and the hum of the ancient air conditioning system, struggling against the Kentucky humidity. Her partner, Detective Marcus Webb, had gone home hours ago to his wife and kids. Marcus was old school, 58 years old and counting down to retirement. He thought cold cases were a waste of resources. "You're chasing ghosts, Sarah," he told her more than once. "Let the dead rest." But Sarah couldn't, not when families were still out there waiting for answers that might never come, not when justice had been delayed for more than half a century. She opened the file again, even though she'd memorized every detail. Black and white photographs spilled across her desk. Martha Jenkins smiled up at her from a graduation photo, cap and gown, her whole future ahead of her. Dark hair and a neat flip, the style of the era, bright eyes full of hope. The crime scene photos were harder to look at. Sarah forced herself to study them anyway, searching for something everyone before her had missed. The door to the division swung open, startling her. It was James Kowalski from the crime lab, a tall man in his mid-40s with wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually messy brown hair. "Sarah, you're still here," he said, approaching her desk with a folder clutched in his hand. His expression was strange, somewhere between excited and deeply unsettled. "Please tell me you have something," Sarah said, sitting up straighter. 3 months ago, she'd submitted evidence from the Jenkins case for advanced DNA testing. The technology had come so far since 1968. Things that were impossible then were routine now. She'd sent Martha's clothing, fingernail scrapings, and trace evidence found at the burial site to the lab, hoping against hope that modern science could speak for the dead. James sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. He didn't say anything at first, just opened his folder and pulled out a report. "We got a hit. A CODIS hit," he said quietly. CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and crime scenes across the country. Sarah's heart rate kicked up. After all these years, after all the dead ends, they had something. "Who is it?" she demanded. James handed her the report. "That's where it gets complicated," he said. Sarah scanned the document, her trained eyes picking out the relevant details. Male DNA profile extracted from epithelial cells under victims' fingernails. Match probability 99.97%. CODIS hit subject, entered system 2019 reference sample from genealogical database cross-reference. She looked up at James. "Genealogical database? We use genetic genealogy. Had to," James explained. "There was no direct hit in the criminal database. But 6 months ago, the department authorized us to partner with a private genealogy company for cold cases. We uploaded the unknown subject's DNA profile and started building a family tree. It took weeks of work, tracking down distant cousins, building out the branches," he continued. "Who is he, James?" The lab tech took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt, a nervous habit Sarah had noticed before. "His name is Robert Dawson. He's 79 years old. Lives in a retirement community in Prospect, James finally revealed. Do we have a prior connection to the victim? Not that I can find in the old case files, Sarah asked, already flipping through the file. But Sarah, here's the thing. James put his glasses back on and met her eyes. Robert Dawson was a police officer, Louisville PD. He worked patrol in 1968, he said. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sat back in her chair, her mind racing. A cop, one of their own. That would explain why the case went cold so quickly, why leads dried up, why witnesses might have been afraid to come forward. Was he ever investigated? She asked. James shook his head. His name doesn't appear anywhere in the original case file. Not as a witness, not as a suspect, nothing, he confirmed. Sarah looked down at the photograph of Martha Jenkins, that hopeful smile frozen in time. How long was he on the force? 32 years. Retired in 2000 with full pension. Decorated officer, apparently. 3 commendations for bravery, James said. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Sarah. While Martha Jenkins rotted in an unmarked grave, her killer had worn a badge, collected a paycheck, and been celebrated as a hero. We need to move carefully on this, James cautioned. Chain of custody on the DNA evidence is solid, but given who he was, his lawyers will fight this every step of the way. We need more than just the DNA. Sarah was already thinking ahead. She needed to build an airtight case. The DNA was powerful, but she needed context. She needed to place Robert Dawson in Martha's orbit in February 1968. She needed motive, opportunity, and a timeline that made sense. Does he know we're looking at him? Sarah asked. No. The genealogy work was done quietly. But once we start pulling his old duty logs and interviewing him, word will get out, James warned. Then we work fast. Sarah stood up, adrenaline coursing through her. I need everything on Robert Dawson. Employment records, duty rosters from February 68, personal history, known associates. I need to know where he was the night Martha disappeared. James nodded. I'll coordinate with records. But Sarah, there's one more thing. He hesitated. Robert Dawson had a partner back in 1968, guy named Frank Mercer. He died in 2015, but his son still lives in Louisville. Might be worth talking to him. See if his father ever mentioned anything unusual from that time. Good call. Get me contact information for Mercer's son. After James left, Sarah sat alone with the case file and the DNA report. 57 years. Martha Jenkins had been waiting 57 years for someone to care enough to find the truth. Sarah picked up the graduation photo and studied it again. I'm going to get him, Martha, she whispered to the smiling face. I promise you, I'm going to get him. Outside the window, Louisville's downtown lights glittered against the night sky. The city had changed so much since 1968. But some things didn't change. Evil didn't have an expiration date, and neither did the pursuit of justice. Sarah pulled out a fresh legal pad and began making notes. Tomorrow she would start the hard work of building a case that would stand up in court. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Go home, Chen. Whatever ghost you're chasing can wait until morning. Sarah smiled slightly and texted back. Not a ghost anymore. We have a name. 3 dots appeared as Marcus typed his response. Then, call me now. She dialed his number. Marcus answered on the first ring. What do you mean you have a name? His voice was sharp, alert. DNA came back. We have our killer, Marcus. That's incredible. Who is it? She took a breath. Robert Dawson, retired Louisville PD. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus let out a low whistle. Jesus Christ, Sarah. Are you sure? 97% sure. James just left with the report. Do you know who you're dealing with? Marcus asked. Dawson's not just any retired cop. He's got friends, powerful friends, people who won't want this coming out. Then they should have caught him in 1968, Sarah said coldly. I'm coming in, Marcus said. Don't do anything until I get there. We need to strategize this carefully. 20 minutes after Sarah Chen hung up the phone, Detective Marcus Webb walked into the homicide division. He was still wearing the Kentucky Wildcat sweatshirt he'd obviously been wearing at home, a stark contrast to the severity of the news. He grabbed a chair and sat down next to Sarah's desk, his movements brusque and alert. "Show me what you have," he commanded. Sarah walked him through everything. The DNA evidence extracted from the epithelial cells under Martha Jenkins's fingernails. The genealogical match with a probability of 99.97%, and the identity of the subject, Robert Dawson, a retired Louisville PD officer with 3 commendations for bravery. Marcus listened carefully, his experienced eyes scanning the reports. When Sarah finished, he leaned back and rubbed his jaw. "Okay, this is solid," he conceded, the doubt gone from his voice, replaced by cold professionalism. "But we need to anticipate the defense. They'll argue contamination. They'll argue the chain of custody was broken over 50 years. They'll argue that genetic genealogy isn't reliable." Sarah nodded. "That's why we need more. We need to put him at the scene. We need to establish a connection between him and Martha." Marcus pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "I'm going to call in some favors. There are a few old-timers from the 60s still around. Let me see if anyone remembers Robert Dawson from back then. Maybe someone knows something they didn't know was important at the time." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for her partner. Marcus might complain about chasing ghosts, but when the truth was found, he was all in. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the station before dawn. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning with strategy and questions. The DNA evidence was damning, but she knew Marcus was right. A good defense attorney, especially one hired by a former cop with powerful friend. Diaz could create reasonable doubt if all they had was a single match from a decades-old crime scene. She spent the early hours pulling Robert Dawson's personnel file from the archives. It was thick, documenting 32 years of service. She spread the contents across the conference room table, creating a timeline of his career. February 1968. Dawson had been 22 years old, fresh out of the police academy, only 6 months on the job when Martha Jenkins disappeared. He'd worked the night shift patrolling the downtown district, the very area where Martha was last seen. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she found his duty log from February 14, 1968, the night Martha vanished. Dawson had logged his shift as routine, patrol sectors covered, no incidents reported. But there was something odd. His partner that night, Frank Mercer, had added a notation. Dawson left vehicle approximately 11:15 p.m., 4th Street and Broadway, responded to potential disturbance, returned 12:30 a.m., all clear. 4th Street and Broadway. That was 2 blocks from where Martha Jenkins was last seen at the bus stop around the same time. Sarah photographed the page with her phone and immediately texted it to Marcus. He replied within seconds. "Holy hell, we need to talk to Mercer's son today." By 9:00 a.m., Sarah and Marcus were driving across Louisville toward the Highlands neighborhood. They were going to meet Thomas Mercer, Frank Mercer's son, a high school history teacher whom Marcus had learned was well respected in the community. The house was a modest brick bungalow. Thomas Mercer, in his late 50s with graying hair and his father's broad shoulders, answered the door before they could knock. He led them to a living room filled with bookshelves and family photos. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for meeting with us," Sarah began, settling onto the couch. "As I mentioned on the phone, we're investigating a cold case from 1968. And your father's name came up in connection with his partner at the time, Robert Dawson." Thomas's expression shifted, something guarded entering his eyes. "What's this about?" "We're looking into the disappearance and murder of Martha Jenkins," Marcus said, watching Thomas carefully. "Your father and Officer Dawson were patrolling the downtown area the night she vanished." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. He walked to a bookshelf and pulled down an old photo album. Opening it to a specific page, he brought it over to them. The photograph showed 2 young police officers in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Frank Mercer and Robert Dawson, 1968. "My father and Bob were close," Thomas said slowly. "Partners for 3 years. Bob was even my godfather." Sarah's heart sank slightly. This was going to be complicated. But something happened, Thomas continued, his voice dropping. In 1971, they stopped speaking completely. I was just a kid, maybe 6 years old, but I remember it clearly. One day Uncle Bob was at every family dinner, every birthday party. The next day he was gone. My mother wouldn't talk about it. My father refused to explain. Did your father ever mention Martha Jenkins? Sarah asked. Thomas looked down at the photograph. Not by name, but years later, when I was in college, I came home for Thanksgiving. My dad had been drinking, which was rare for him. We were alone in the kitchen, and out of nowhere, he said something I never forgot. He paused, gathering his memory. He said, "Sometimes you learn that the person you trust most in the world is capable of terrible things, and when that happens, you have two choices: become complicit or walk away." I walked away, but I carried the weight of it for the rest of my life. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Did he ever elaborate? No. He seemed to catch himself, like he'd said too much. He never brought it up again. Whatever happened between him and Bob Dawson, my father took it to his grave. Mr. Mercer, Sarah said carefully, we have evidence that places Robert Dawson at the scene where Martha Jenkins was last seen the night she disappeared. DNA evidence links him to her murder. Thomas's face went pale. He sat down heavily in a chair. Oh, God. All these years I wondered. There was always this shadow over my father. He was a good cop, a good man, but there was something that haunted him. Now I understand. Did your father keep any records from that time? Journals, notes, anything? Marcus asked gently. Thomas nodded slowly. After he died, I packed up his things. There were boxes I never went through. Personal papers, old case files he'd kept. They're in my attic. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, but I couldn't look at them either. We'd like to see those boxes, Marcus said. An hour later, Sarah and Marcus were sitting in Thomas Mercer's attic, surrounded by dusty cardboard boxes. Thomas had given them permission to take whatever they needed, but had excused himself, unable to watch them dig through his father's past. The attic was stifling, filled with the stale smell of old paper and forgotten wood. Sarah, methodical as always, started on the third box. Tucked under a stack of old property tax receipts, she found it, a leather-bound journal. "Marcus, look at this," she breathed, wiping dust from the cover. Frank Mercer's neat, disciplined handwriting filled the pages, daily entries from his years on the force. Sarah flipped rapidly through the months, finally reaching February 1968. Her breath caught in her throat. "Marcus, look at this," she repeated, her voice low with urgency. Marcus leaned over as Sarah read aloud from the entry dated February 15, 1968, the day after Martha disappeared. "Can't sleep. Keep seeing her face at the bus stop. Bob said she was just another junkie looking for a fix. Said we had to keep moving, but I saw her nurse's uniform. She wasn't what he said. When I heard the call this morning about a missing nursing student, my blood ran cold. Tried to talk to Bob about it. He got angry. Said I was imagining things. Said, we never saw anyone at that bus stop, but I know what I saw. I know who I saw. God help me. What do I do?" Sarah's hands shook as she turned the page. The next entry was dated 2 days later. "Confronted Bob today. Asked him directly about the girl. He denied everything, but I could see it in his eyes. The fear, the guilt. He grabbed my arm, told me that if I valued my career, my family, my life, I'd forget I ever saw anything that night. Said he had friends in high places who would make sure any accusation I made would destroy me. I believe him. I'm a coward. God forgive me. I'm a coward." There were no more entries directly about Martha Jenkins, but page after page documented Frank Mercer's deteriorating mental state. He was drinking more, fighting with his wife, and struggling with nightmares. Then, in March 1971, came a final, definitive entry. "Told Bob today that I'm requesting a new partner. Can't do this anymore. Can't look at him every day knowing what I know." He didn't argue. "We both know this partnership is over. We both know why. I should have gone to the captain in February of 1968. I should have told the truth. Instead, I protected a monster, and an innocent girl's family has no answers. I'll carry the shame until the day I die." Sarah closed the journal, her throat tight. Frank Mercer had known. For 3 years he'd worked alongside Martha's killer, stayed silent, and let a murderer continue wearing a badge. "This is witness testimony," Marcus said quietly, running a hand over his face. "From beyond the grave. But it's testimony. Combined with the DNA, with Dawson's presence at the scene, this builds a prosecutable case." Sarah pulled out her phone and called the district attorney's office. They needed an arrest warrant, and they needed it today. Robert Dawson had lived free for 57 years. That ended now. By late afternoon, Sarah and Marcus sat in Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh's office. Jennifer, 43 and sharp as a razor, listened to their presentation without interruption, studying the evidence laid out before her. "The DNA is solid," Jennifer said when they finished. "Frank Mercer's journal provides context and corroboration. But you understand what you're walking into, right? Robert Dawson isn't just any defendant. He's connected. Former Louisville Metro PD, decorated veteran, respected in law enforcement circles. His attorney will be expensive and aggressive." "We understand," Sarah said firmly, "but the evidence speaks for itself." Jennifer nodded. "I agree. I'll take this to Judge Morrison this afternoon for an arrest warrant. But detectives, be prepared. This case is going to be a media circus. A retired cop accused of a 57-year-old murder." "Let them," Marcus said. "Martha Jenkins deserves her day in court, even if it's more than half a century late." As Jennifer began drafting the warrant application, Sarah's phone rang. It was James from the crime lab. "Sarah, I've been going through more of the evidence from the burial site," he said, his voice urgent. "You need to see this." "What is it?" "There were fabric fibers found on Martha's coat," James explained. "In 1968, they couldn't do much with them, but I ran them through modern analysis. They're from a Louisville Police Department uniform specific to the 1960s issue." Sarah closed her eyes. More evidence. The case was building piece by piece into something unassailable. "Email me the report," she said. "We're getting an arrest warrant as we speak." She thought about Martha Jenkins, walking out of that hospital 57 years ago, and about Robert Dawson, young and arrogant, believing he could get away with murder because he wore a badge. "I will be," Sarah said to Marcus, answering his earlier question about if she was okay. "When he's in handcuffs." The arrest warrant came through at 7:00 a.m. the next morning. Judge Morrison had reviewed the evidence, the DNA, the duty log, the journal entries, and now the uniform fibers, and signed off without hesitation. Sarah held the document, feeling the weight of 57 years of injustice compressed into a single sheet of paper. Now, the arrest was all that was left. The arrest warrant came through at 7:00 a.m. the next morning. Judge Morrison had reviewed the evidence, the DNA match, the duty log discrepancy, Frank Mercer's journal, and the new report confirming the police uniform fibers, and signed off without hesitation. Sarah held the document in her hands, feeling the weight of 57 years of injustice compressed into a single sheet of paper. Marcus drove, while Sarah sat in the passenger seat, running through the plan one more time. They'd coordinated with a tactical unit as backup, standard procedure for arresting a former law enforcement officer. They didn't expect Robert Dawson to resist, but they couldn't be too careful. The retirement community in Prospect was upscale, manicured lawns and brick buildings arranged around a small artificial lake. Wealthy retirees enjoying their golden years. Sarah felt a fresh wave of anger. Martha Jenkins never got golden years. She never got to retire, to travel, to grow old with the man she was supposed to marry. Unit 17 was Dawson's address, a ground-floor apartment with a small patio overlooking the lake. Sarah and Marcus approached the door while 4 uniformed officers positioned themselves at the perimeter. Sarah knocked, loud and authoritative. "Police, open up!" There was slow movement inside, and the door opened. Sarah found herself face to face with Robert Dawson for the first time. He was 79, but carried himself like a much younger man, tall, still broad-shouldered, with silver hair neatly combed, He wore slacks and a polo shirt. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, taking in the badges and the uniforms, calculating the situation in seconds. "Can I help you, officers?" His voice was steady, polite even. "Robert Dawson?" Sarah asked. "That's right. I'm Detective Sarah Chen, Louisville Metro Police. This is Detective Marcus Webb. We have a warrant for your arrest in town. Connection with the murder of Martha Jenkins in February 1968. Something flickered across Dawson's face. Not shock, not denial. Something closer to resignation, maybe even relief. "I see," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, "I suppose this day was always going to come." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Marcus said, stepping forward with the handcuffs. For a moment Sarah thought Dawson might resist. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched, but then he turned slowly, offering his wrists. Marcus cuffed him efficiently, reciting the Miranda rights while Sarah watched. "I do," Dawson replied calmly when asked if he understood his rights. "I was a cop for 32 years, Detective. I know the drill." At the station, they processed Dawson through booking. He cooperated fully, speaking only when necessary. Sarah watched him through the one-way glass as he sat in the interrogation room, hands folded on the table, waiting. "We should talk to him now, before his attorney arrives," Marcus advised. They entered the room. Dawson looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Dawson, you've been read your rights. Do you wish to speak with us?" Sarah asked. "Depends on what you want to talk about." "Martha Jenkins, February 14th, 1968. You were on patrol that night downtown district with your partner, Frank Mercer." Dawson's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of Frank's name. "Frank's been dead for 10 years, he stated. "We know, but we also know you logged a disturbance call at 4th and Broadway at 11:15 p.m. Martha Jenkins was last seen at a bus stop 2 blocks from there at approximately the same time." "That was a long time ago, Detective. I responded to hundreds of calls in my career," Dawson dismissed. "This one was different, though, wasn't it?" Marcus leaned forward. "This one ended with a young woman strangled and buried near the river." "I want my attorney," Dawson said flatly. The interview was over, but Sarah had seen something in Dawson's eyes when she mentioned Frank Mercer's name. Guilt, regret, maybe even fear. Later that afternoon, Sarah drove across town to meet with Martha Jenkins's family. It was the part of the job she dreaded most, but also the most important. They deserved to hear about the arrest directly from her. Martha's younger sister, Patricia Hoffman, was 75 now, living in a modest ranch house in the suburbs. When Sarah called ahead, Patricia's voice had broken with emotion. "You found him? After all this time, you really found him?" Now Sarah sat in Patricia's living room, looking at family photos on the mantel. Martha was in so many of them, a bright presence frozen in time. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Her husband David sat beside her, holding her hand. "I was 19 when Martha disappeared," Patricia said. "She was my big sister, my hero. She was going to be a nurse, going to help people. And then she was just gone." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Sarah said gently. "I know this doesn't bring her back, but we have strong evidence. Robert Dawson's DNA was found on Martha's body." Patricia's face hardened. "A police officer. All these years we trusted the police to find her killer, and one of their own did it." "Frank Mercer, Dawson's partner at the time, suspected what happened," Sarah continued. "He kept a journal. We found entries documenting his suspicions, his confrontation with Dawson. So, 2 men knew what happened to my sister, and both of them kept quiet." Patricia's voice was bitter. "One murdered her, the other protected him. Frank Mercer carried that guilt for the rest of his life," Marcus offered quietly. "His son told us it destroyed him in many ways. That doesn't excuse his silence, but he paid a price for it." "Not the price Martha paid," Patricia said sharply. She picked up a framed photograph of Martha in her nursing uniform. "She was going to marry Timothy Brennan that June. Did you know that he waited for her for 2 years, hoping she'd come back? When they finally found her body, it broke him. He never married, lived alone until he died in 2003. She destroyed his life too, that monster." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer Walsh, the ADA. Dawson's attorney is Alan Brookshire, former federal prosecutor. We're in for a fight. Marcus saw Sarah's expression. Dawson lawyered up with Alan Brookshire? Marcus whistled low. Brookshire was legendary. Expensive, brilliant, and ruthless. They're going to attack the DNA evidence. Chain of custody, contamination, everything. Let them try, Sarah said. We've been meticulous. The evidence is solid. The fight for Martha Jenkins was just beginning. The weeks following Robert Dawson's arrest were a whirlwind of preparation. The case immediately dominated local news. Former Louisville police officer arrested in 1968. Cold case murder. Sarah gave a press conference laying out the basics of the case without compromising the prosecution's evidence. Beside her, a photograph of Martha Jenkins, young and hopeful, reminded everyone what this was truly about. Sarah's response to a reporter who questioned if justice could be served after so much time became the defining soundbite. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Martha Jenkins deserves her day in court. Behind the media circus, the real work continued. Sarah and Marcus built their case brick by brick. They interviewed everyone who'd known Dawson, turning up a former dispatcher who recalled Dawson being unusually agitated the day Martha's body was found, claiming he had the flu. Another retired detective remembered Dawson volunteering for the task force investigating Martha's murder. What had seemed like dedication now looked like a killer trying to monitor the investigation. 2 weeks after the arrest, Sarah met with Dr. Elizabeth Grant, a forensic psychologist. Dr. Grant specialized in criminal behavior and had been following the case. Men like Dawson don't see their victims as fully human, Dr. Grant explained. Martha Jenkins wasn't a person to him. She was an object, something he could control and discard. That's how he lived with himself all these years. She noted that his ability to kill and then live a seemingly normal life, even thriving in law enforcement, suggested a profound lack of empathy, a possible antisocial tendency. Sarah thought about Dawson's composure during the arrest, the complete lack of visible remorse, and realized the expert was likely right. Meanwhile, the opposition solidified. Dawson's attorney, Alan Brookshire, was a former federal prosecutor, described by Marcus as expensive, brilliant, and ruthless. They knew the defense would attack the DNA's chain of custody, the reliability of genetic genealogy, and Frank Mercer's journal as inadmissible hearsay. The preliminary hearing was set for late September, 4 months after Dawson's arrest. The courthouse was packed with media, onlookers, and Martha's family. Patricia Hoffman sat in the front row, clutching a photograph of her sister. Robert Dawson entered in a tailored suit, looking every bit the respectable retired officer. Brookshire had secured him bail, arguing he was not a flight risk or a danger at his age, a decision Sarah had bitterly fought. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh presented the state's case. She methodically laid out the original crime, the decades of failure, and then the breakthrough. The results were conclusive, Jennifer stated. DNA extracted from epithelial cells found under the victim's fingernails matched the defendant, Robert Dawson, with a probability of 99.97%. Brookshire was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The chain of custody for evidence collected in 1968 is highly questionable. Jennifer was ready, presenting meticulous documentation of the evidence's storage and testing protocols. When Brookshire argued that mere contact did not equal murder, Jennifer countered with the autopsy report. The defendant's DNA was found under the victim's fingernails, Your Honor. Defensive wounds indicate she fought her attacker. This wasn't casual contact. This was a violent struggle. Jennifer then introduced Frank Mercer's journal. The courtroom fell silent as she read the key passages aloud. The partner's guilt, the threats, and the forced silence. Brookshire's objection that the journal was hearsay was overruled by the judge for the purpose of the preliminary hearing. Sarah took the stand, guiding the court through the entire investigation, from the genealogy hit to the timeline that placed Dawson at 4th and Broadway. Brookshire hammered her on cross-examination, attempting to portray the case as a witch hunt, driven by Sarah's pressure to solve the unsolvable. "I'm under pressure to find justice for victims and their families," Sarah replied evenly. The DNA match to Mr. Dawson was generated by an objective scientific process, not by my assumptions or biases. After the crime lab testimony, Jennifer dropped her bombshell. Your Honor, the state would like to call an additional witness, Timothy Brennan. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Timothy, Martha's fiancé, was now 80 years old. He had been a recluse for decades, destroyed by Martha's death. He was wheeled into the courtroom, frail but with clear, focused eyes. I've waited 57 years to see this day. I wouldn't miss it, Timothy stated. He spoke of Martha. She was the love of my life. We were going to get married in June of 1968. She wanted 4 children. I wanted whatever made her happy. His voice broke as he described his years of desperate hope, his weekly visits to the police for answers that never came. Timothy looked directly at Robert Dawson. I want you to know what you took from this world, and you snuffed that out like it meant nothing. When Brookshire tried to dismiss the testimony as mere emotion, Timothy responded powerfully. No, I wasn't there. But I know what Martha's last day was like because she called me from the hospital before her shift ended. She was happy, excited about the wedding plans. She told me she loved me, and she'd see me the next day. That was the last time I heard her voice. He concluded, I spent the next 57 years in a kind of limbo, neither living nor dead, just existing, waiting for this day, waiting for justice. When Timothy was wheeled out, the courtroom was silent, even Judge Reynolds appearing moved. She returned quickly with her ruling. Based on the evidence presented today, I find probable cause to believe that the defendant, Robert Dawson, committed the murder of Martha Jenkins in February 1968. This case will proceed to trial. Patricia Hoffman sobbed in relief, and Sarah felt Marcus grip her shoulder in triumph. The battle had been won, but the war, the full trial, was yet to come. I will rewrite Chapter 6, focusing on the high-stakes drama of the preliminary hearing, the psychological analysis of the killer, and the devastating emotional impact of Timothy Brennan's testimony. Please note that to maintain a tight narrative structure and avoid redundancy with the previously rewritten chapters, the content regarding the initial DNA, journal, and fiber evidence presentation will be concise, focusing instead on the dramatic courtroom conflict and emotional core. The 4 months between Robert Dawson's arrest and the preliminary hearing were a relentless grind. Sarah spent those weeks living on adrenaline, preparing for a legal fight that felt personal. She was the public face of a case that had become a national sensation. Every news outlet was covering the story. A decorated retired cop accused of a 57-year-old murder, solved by cutting-edge DNA technology. Sarah managed the media circus, giving carefully worded press conferences, always standing beside a photograph of a smiling 23-year-old Martha Jenkins. Her message remained unwavering. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Martha Jenkins deserves her day in court. As the legal strategy sharpened, Sarah sought to understand why. She met with Dr. Elizabeth Grant, a forensic psychologist specializing in criminal behavior. When I read about Robert Dawson, certain patterns jumped out at me, Dr. Grant explained. Dawson was young in 1968, just 6 months out of the academy, a vulnerable time for officers who suddenly gain authority without the wisdom to properly wield it. The ability to kill someone and then live a seemingly normal, even successful life for decades suggests a profound lack of empathy, Dr. Grant concluded. He stayed in law enforcement, even thrived in it, because he enjoyed the power and authority. Men like Dawson don't see their victims as fully human. Martha Jenkins wasn't a person to him. She was an object he could control and discard. That's how he lived with himself all these years. The profile chilled Sarah, confirming her suspicion about the man's unreadable, clinical demeanor during the arrest. This wasn't just about science. It was about exposing the darkness hiding behind a badge. The preliminary hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. The courthouse was packed. Patricia Hoffman sat in the front row, clutching her sister's photograph. Robert Dawson entered in a tailored suit, escorted by his formidable attorney, Alan Brookshire. Brookshire had successfully argued for bail, allowing Dawson to avoid shackles and an orange jumpsuit. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh opened for the state, methodically laying out the tragic history of the case. In 2024, Jennifer announced, pivoting to the breakthrough, Detective Sarah Chen reopened this cold case and submitted evidence for advanced DNA testing. The results were conclusive. DNA extracted from epithelial cells found under the victim's fingernails matched the defendant, Robert Dawson, with a probability of 99.97%. Brookshire immediately challenged the chain of custody of evidence stored for over half a century. Jennifer shut down the argument with meticulous documentation, then moved to the journal. She read Frank Mercer's entries, painting a damning picture of his partner's suspicious behavior, the cover-up, and the threats that silenced him. "Hearsay," Brookshire objected. "The author is deceased and cannot be cross-examined." "These are contemporaneous entries, Your Honor," Jennifer countered, "written immediately following the events in question. They fall under the recorded recollection exception to hearsay." Judge Reynolds allowed it. Brookshire was losing ground. Sarah took the stand, clear and composed, walking the court through the investigation, from the genealogy hit to the timeline placing Dawson at the scene. Brookshire attacked her professionally, suggesting she was under considerable pressure to produce results. "I'm under pressure to find justice for victims and their families," Sarah replied evenly. After Dr. James Kowalski from the crime lab testified to the scientific accuracy of the DNA analysis, Jennifer dropped her final bombshell. The state called an additional witness, Timothy Brennan. A murmur swept the courtroom. Martha's fiancé, whom she was supposed to marry in June 1968, was now 80 years old. He had been a recluse for decades. A bailiff wheeled him into the courtroom, frail, but with eyes that were clear and focused. "I've waited 57 years to see this day," Timothy whispered, his voice soft but steady. "I wouldn't miss it." He told the court about Martha, the church social where they met, their wedding plans, the dream of having 4 children. Then she was gone, just vanished into the night, he said, his voice catching. "I went to the police every week for months, demanding answers. They had nothing. Eventually, they stopped returning my calls." Timothy looked directly at Robert Dawson, forcing the killer to meet his eyes. "I want you to know what you took from this world. Martha would have saved lives as a nurse. She would have made this world better just by being in it, and you snuffed that out like it meant nothing." When Brookshire attempted to suggest that emotion wasn't evidence, Timothy countered, "I know what Martha's last day was like because she called me from the hospital before her shift ended. She told me she loved me and she'd see me the next day. That was the last time I heard her voice." He detailed his subsequent life of paralyzing grief. "I couldn't practice law, couldn't focus, couldn't care about anything. I spent the next 57 years in a kind of limbo, neither living nor dead, just existing, waiting for this day, waiting for justice." When Timothy was wheeled out, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Judge Reynolds returned with her ruling. "Based on the evidence presented today, the scientific evidence of the DNA and the corroborating testimony, I find probable cause to believe that the defendant, Robert Dawson, committed the murder of Martha Jenkins in February 1968. This case will proceed to trial." The gavel came down. Patricia Hoffman sobbed in relief. Across the courtroom, Robert Dawson sat motionless, but Alan Brookshire was already scribbling notes, planning his trial strategy. The emotional victory was Sarah's, but the ultimate legal fight was still ahead. The winter of 2025 was brutal in Louisville, but Detective Sarah Chen barely noticed. The trial date, January 15th, loomed, and she spent December and early January preparing for war against Alan Brookshire. Sarah and Jennifer Walsh, the ADA, anticipated every defense strategy, bringing in expert witnesses on DNA analysis, chain of custody protocols, and the reliability of genetic genealogy. Their most crucial discovery, however, lay buried in old records, pattern evidence of Robert Dawson's violent behavior. Sarah and her team tracked down every person who had known Dawson in 1968, and the results were disturbing. 3 women came forward with stories they had never told anyone, tales of abuse of power that had been suppressed by the system decades ago. A police department secretary claimed Dawson had cornered her in a stairwell in 1969, touching her inappropriately until she screamed. A bartender recounted Dawson following her home one night in 1970, only leaving when her boyfriend appeared. A college student reported that Dawson had pulled her over for a fake traffic violation in 1972 and propositioned her. None of the complaints had gone anywhere. The system, Jennifer Walsh noted grimly, had protected him over and over again. This pattern evidence would be critical in proving Dawson's predisposition for violence against women. On January 15th, the trial began. The courtroom was packed, the trial of the decade for Kentucky. Jennifer Walsh stood before the jury, her message direct and unyielding. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about justice delayed but not denied. Martha Jenkins was a 23-year-old nursing student with her whole life ahead of her. Jennifer walked the jury through the timeline, the 57 years of silence, and then the discovery of the killer's calling card. She'd fought for her life. She'd preserved her attacker's DNA under her nails. And that DNA belongs to him. Jennifer pointed directly at Robert Dawson. Alan Brookshire's opening was smooth and confident. He acknowledged the tragedy, but framed the evidence as flawed. This case is built on a foundation of speculation and faulty science. What the prosecution has is a DNA match that proves only one thing. At some point somewhere, my client had contact with the victim. That's it. That's the entire case. He painted Dawson as a decorated veteran and a good man being used as a scapegoat. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with Sarah testifying for 2 full days. Brookshire hammered her on cross-examination, but she held firm. The evidence, she maintained, spoke for itself. Witness testimony. The DNA. Dr. James Kowalski testified about the complex DNA analysis. Brookshire's expert attempted to question the methodology, but crumbled under Jennifer's cross-examination, admitting he had never actually examined the evidence. The heartbreak. Timothy Brennan testified again, recounting the life stolen from him. When Brookshire tried to suggest Timothy had moved on, his response was devastating. "I never moved on, Mr. Brookshire. I never married. I never had children. I spent 57 years in emotional prison because your client took the only woman I ever loved." The pattern. The 3 women who had been victimized by Dawson's abuse of power testified. Judge Reynolds allowed their testimony as pattern evidence, showing Dawson's propensity for violence against women. The conscience. Thomas Mercer read his father's journal aloud, his voice breaking as he shared Frank Mercer's agonizing confession of cowardice and guilt. "My father wrote, 'I see her face in my dreams, the girl at the bus stop, and I said nothing. I protected a monster because I was afraid.'" On their final day, Jennifer presented the physical evidence. Martha's coat with the police uniform fibers, the autopsy photos showing defensive wounds, and the fingernail scrapings that had preserved Dawson's DNA for 57 years. She built a comprehensive timeline, proving Dawson was in the right place, his DNA was under the victim's nails, and he had threatened his partner into silence. The defense case was brief. Brookshire called character witnesses, but Jennifer quickly got them to admit they hadn't known Dawson well in 1968. Brookshire took the risky move of putting Robert Dawson on the stand. Dawson denied everything, claiming he never saw Martha and had no idea how his DNA ended up under her fingernails. Jennifer tore through his testimony on cross-examination. "Explain to this jury how your skin cells ended up embedded under Martha Jenkins' fingernails if you never touched her." Dawson's composure finally cracked. He stammered, suggesting contamination or a lab error. Jennifer then produced Frank Mercer's journal. "Your partner wrote that you told him Martha was just another junkie. But Martha wasn't a junkie. She was a nursing student in her uniform. How would you know to describe her that way if you hadn't seen her?" "I never said that." "Frank was mistaken," Dawson insisted, looking cornered. Or he was telling the truth, and you murdered Martha Jenkins and got away with it for 57 years because you were a cop and the system protected you. The objection was sustained, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Dawson squirm, unable to explain away the combination of forensic and circumstantial evidence. Closing arguments came on a frigid February morning, almost exactly 57 years after Martha's death. Jennifer Walsh concluded with a forceful appeal. Martha Jenkins fought her killer. In her last moments, she left his DNA under her fingernails like a message, in a bottle cast into the future. And 57 years later, we found that message. It says, "Robert Dawson killed me." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict. In the case of the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Robert Dawson on the charge of murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Patricia Hoffman collapsed in tears. Timothy Brennan closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer. Robert Dawson showed no emotion, but as he was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met Sarah's. In that moment, Sarah saw what she'd suspected all along. He'd always known this day would come. Part of him had been waiting for it. The 6-hour wait for the verdict had felt like another 57 years. When the jury forewoman read the word guilty on the charge of murder in the first degree, the tension in the courtroom shattered. Patricia Hoffman collapsed in tears. Timothy Brennan closed his eyes, whispering what might have been a prayer. Robert Dawson showed no emotion, but as the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, his eyes met Sarah's. She saw the resignation. He'd always known this day would come. The media coverage was explosive, leading every news channel in Kentucky. Sarah gave a brief statement. Today was an important step toward justice for Martha Jenkins, but our work isn't finished. 3 months later, Robert Dawson was sentenced to life without parole. At 79, everyone knew it was effectively a death sentence. Alan Brookshire immediately filed appeals, challenging the DNA evidence and the admissibility of Frank Mercer's journal, but every appeal was denied. The trial had changed everything for Sarah. She was promoted to lieutenant and given her own cold case unit with 3 detectives under her command. The unit had solved 6 more cases in the past 3 years, bringing closure to other families who had waited decades. Marcus finally retired, but he consulted with the unit regularly, meeting Sarah weekly. 3 years after the verdict, Sarah Chen stood in Cave Hill Cemetery on a warm spring morning. The dogwood trees were in bloom, their white petals drifting on the breeze. She carried a bouquet of daisies, Martha's favorite flower. Martha's remains had been moved 2 years prior from the unmarked grave to this peaceful spot overlooking the city. The headstone was simple and elegant. Martha Elizabeth Jenkins, 1945-1968. Beloved daughter, sister, fiancée, your voice was finally heard. Sarah placed the flowers at the base of the stone. She came here every few months, a ritual to remind herself why the work mattered. Patricia Hoffman, now 78, approached, leaning on a cane. She sat on the bench near Martha's grave. "Better than I have in 57 years, Patricia said, when Sarah asked how she was. "I thought getting justice would feel different, more triumphant maybe, but mostly I just feel relief, like I can finally breathe again." Patricia shared news. Timothy Brennan had passed away peacefully in his sleep the previous month. He made it to the trial, saw Dawson convicted, and I think that gave him permission to let go. He left everything to a nursing scholarship fund in Martha's name. 50 students have received aid so far. He never stopped loving her, Patricia continued. That's what Dawson took from them, not just Martha's life, but their whole future together. Patricia pulled an envelope from her purse. "Timothy asked me to give you this. He wrote it a few weeks before he died." Sarah opened the letter. Timothy, at 83, wrote that he didn't have much time left. He explained how Martha's disappearance had left a hole in his soul. He admitted he didn't dare hope when Sarah reopened the case. "But you didn't give up. You followed the evidence no matter where it led. You gave Martha back her voice. The day of the verdict, when they said guilty, I felt something I hadn't felt in 57 years. Peace. Knowing that her killer would face justice, knowing that she hadn't been forgotten. You gave me the gift of closure, Detective Chen. You let me hear Martha's voice one last time, And now I can join her, knowing that her story has been told and her killer has been held accountable. Thank you for fighting for a girl you never knew." Sarah wiped her eyes. She folded the letter, knowing she would keep it with Martha's case file. "You didn't just solve Martha's case," Patricia said before leaving. "You solved ours too. Our whole family has been in limbo for 57 years. Now we can finally move forward." Sarah sat for a while longer, thinking about the work, giving voice to the silenced, bringing light to the darkness. Her phone buzzed. A text from Detective Lisa Rodriguez, one of her team members. "Lieutenant, we got a hit on the Patterson case from 1983, DNA match through Genealogy. Can you come in?" Sarah stood and touched Martha's headstone one last time. "I have to go. Someone else needs help, but I'll be back." Later that evening, Jennifer Walsh, now the elected district attorney, called. "Sarah, I just wanted to let you know Robert Dawson died this afternoon. Heart failure. He never made it out of prison." Sarah set down her fork. "Relieved," she told Jennifer. "He'll never appeal again. Martha's justice is final now." Sarah walked to her memorial board, where Martha's smiling photo rested alongside the 11 other faces of the victims her unit had brought closure to. "It's over," she whispered softly to Martha's photo. "He's gone. You can rest now." She thought about Martha, 23 years old, fighting her killer, scratching his skin, preserving his DNA under her nails like a message to the future. "Don't forget me. Don't let him win. Find the truth." "We found it, Martha," Sarah whispered. "We found it.